Welcome everyone to the Surfing Historian. I'm your host, Jason Old, historian, surfer, and world traveler. This podcast is dedicated to highlighting some of the latest scholarly research in humanities, social sciences, and surf studies. So paddle out with us while we glide through the world of academia. Joining me today from Australia is my good friend Tom Wilson. Tom's the founder of Wave Changer, a Sydney, Australia-based nonprofit organization whose vision is to create a carbon-neutral, waste-free surf industry that's respectful to nature, yet retains the innovation, high performance, and excitement we all expect from surfing. In this episode, we'll chat about Wave Changer's mission, which is to enable the surf community to embrace sustainable solutions and reduce its environmental impact. We'll also talk about how Tom and his team are going about this ambitious undertaking. I'm super stoked to have you on, Tom. But before we get started, I'd like to thank you, as well as our listeners, for joining me for another episode of the Surfing Historian.
Hey Jason, thanks for having me on. So a little backstory of how Wave Changer started was some academic research that I did, a thesis on the subject of, the title was Environmental Initiatives and Consumer Behaviours in the Australian Surf Industry. That was done in 2018. Found it super interesting. It was a year-long unbiased study looking at different initiatives in the surf industry. There was a bit of history at the start, looking at what has worked and what hasn't, and how we've got to the point where we are now with regards to surfboards, wetsuits, wax. So it's all about physical equipment in surfing rather than much to do with the culture. And I loved it. It was actually sad when it was over because I had spoken to so many cool people. The research, the field research, the interviews, the questionnaires. I made some friends who are involved with Wave Changer now, some connections, my supervisor, we're still good mates. We catch up for dinner and lunch every so often. So yeah, the whole experience was really cool. And that was the platform for Wave Changer because I wanted to do something with the research rather than just stop and have it as a publication. And it wasn't quite clear what Wave Changer was going to be at the start. We were not distracted, but we had our heads turned by a fin manufacturer who saw some prototype recycled plastic fins that we made. And this was just about a year ago. And they had asked if we wanted to collaborate or maybe even take over. And they had an established production line of plastic from beaches in Bali, but it was just a project that seemed too big and we were kind of veering off from what the original thing was, and that was awareness and perhaps some projects where we are aiming to influence in a positive way the consumer behavior, consumers being surfers, and yeah, just trying to increase environmental awareness, which will hopefully empower them to make better decisions.
Sort of an introductory question. Where did the name Wave Changer come from?
It was my girlfriend who came up with it. There were loads of names. There was surfingandsustainability.com, which is the domain, which I still own. And then there was Future Surf Collective, but that was too similar to FCS Fins. And there were plenty of names where we wanted technology, innovation, sustainability encapsulated. But then my girlfriend said, how about Wave Changer, as in game changer? And I asked a bunch of people, here's 10 names. And it was always in the top 3. I asked people, what was your top 3? And everyone loved Wave Changer. And it was a no-brainer from that point. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the name. It really does. It sort of embodies what you're doing. You are the team is looking at ways to create more sustainable approaches to surfing, right? And so But you said in your research that you looked at what has worked and what didn't work. And so in your research, can you give some examples of things that you found that had worked and things that hadn't worked? I mean, you don't have to, obviously talk about every single one individually, but, what are some things that you found as you were doing your research that did work? And how did that contribute to the framework and the impetus behind Wave Changer?
So I got excited by the innovations that I was researching. Wetsuits made out of natural rubber, literally scored from the side of the tree, and the rubber pours down, and that is turned into a wetsuit. Wax made on a farm in the US. The brand's called Matunis, and they grow everything on that farm, that one site that goes into the wax. Surfboards. I'd say surfboards are probably the least environmentally along the line, but there are some niche areas around the world. There's an incredible amount of innovation coming out of France, for example. There's people making surfboards with bio waste formed into a blank. So it's kind of referred to as a bio foam, but it is essentially an organic entity that's made into a foam. And there's also 3D printed surfboards now, which have no foam in the middle. And essentially it is one giant piece of plastic that could be recycled. So that got me excited, the materials, the innovation, and, we can't escape technology these days. So how can we best use it to protect the planet? And then I also touched upon other schemes that aren't so common in surfing, which is like car sharing, for example. There's an organization over here called GoGet, and there's also another one called Popcar. And they were hugely popular up until COVID, and now I see a lot of them just sitting around, but I'm sure it will kick off again. But just the concept of sharing, not owning something. And I think we as surfers, we're very proud of our surfboard collection, and it's hard to let go of some surfboards. But if we own less of not just surfboards, of anything, then that's one step. That's one really easy step, and that is owning less stuff, buying less stuff. And then if there's some sort of initiative that's out there that encourages people to borrow, share, swap, I think that's the first step, which is the easiest thing people can do.
Yeah, you talk about in your research, you gave an example right there, the ride sharing, something that my buddy Leon, Dr. Mock, talked about in episode 5 was, he was looking at surfing and sustainability. And he found that, the vast majority of surfers would actually, pay extra to support surf camps or other entities that, are involved in sustainable practices. And it looks to me in your research as well, of course, you gave the example of the ride sharing, but in your research, you talk about Australian surfers specifically. And, based on what you're saying, I'll just read from it. Australian surfers on the whole do care about the environment, and regardless of their level of earnings, would pay extra for environmentally friendly surfing products. And so how is, you wrote that in your research, and how has that panned out as you've sort of managed Wave Changer? Have you seen that you've really been able to substantiate that claim in your research?
I like to think so, but I'll be honest, another part of the research indicates that people care more about performance and cost out of 5 factors to choose from. And sustainable materials was, I think, second last in the pecking order behind the brand. No, sorry, the brand was third. I think the last one was where the board was made. People really don't care about that. But the performance, which is obvious, and the cost, they're 2 critical things, which perhaps applies to any product, especially sporting equipment. But I do find that surfers in general do care about the environment. It's pretty obvious. But one of the findings from the research was that of people who are extra aware of sustainable initiatives and really involved in their community, 50%, I think it was like 52% or something of those kind of, eco warriors, for lack of a better description, 50% of those guys didn't know what their surfboard was made of. Prior to a lot of my research, there was a lot of technologies and materials that I didn't know too much about. But I think as soon as you know what your surfboard's made out of, there's a shift in thinking. And I've seen that with some people where I do a talk and I take half a surfboard because the EPS foam in the middle, the expanded polystyrene foam in the middle, is exposed and you can see it and you can rub it with your hand. And the little beads that come off are kind of what you would get in a beanbag. So quite often the little beads of EPS foam that you'll see on the beach, I think it's highly unlikely someone's been on the beach with a beanbag, but it's more likely that a surfboard's broken in half and the beads have just blown with the wind and it's almost out of sight, out of mind. You don't see the middle of the surfboard until it breaks. But it's ironically, the EPS foam is billed as a eco-friendly alternative because it can be recycled compared to polyurethane foam. But polyurethane foam, if a board snaps in half, it just stays solid. The foam doesn't blow anywhere. So I think we need to move away from oil-based foam as a core. That concept of a surfboard has been the same since the late 1950s, but we're seeing some super cool stuff. The 3D printed surfboards, there's no foam in sight and it could be fully circular in terms of being recycled. And I think to get surfboards back to manufacturers so they can do something sensible with it, I believe there needs to be an incentive, probably financial. Return your board and you get $150 off a new one, or you maybe get $100 cash back or something. Just as positive nudges of behavior.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, there's every so often I see, whether it was a surfing magazine or an article where, it's almost like the graveyard where the surfboards are, half surfboards in the sand. It's sort of telling of, like you say, all the little foam beads, where they're coming from. Obviously you mentioned that surf technology hasn't changed much since the 50s, something you obviously noted in your research as well. But, you have also something in this document or article about, looking at 90% of modern surfboards, roughly 1 million per year, were still produced using polyurethane blanks, usually covered in fiberglass and coated in polyester or epoxy resin. And I guess my question for you is, did I read that correctly? And the other thing is, and I always wondered, back in the day when Clark foam sort of ceased to exist, I was always wondering, like, well, what happened? It seems like they had it sort of cornered the market on surfboards because it seemed like everyone used Clark foam. And so your research, your article, and reading that, obviously answered that question, in that Clark foam was forced to cease operations in 2005 due to problems with meeting environmental regulations. And so, again, you helped me sort of solve the mystery. At least it was a mystery for me. I guess I kind of forgot about it too. And that makes total sense. And so I guess back to my question, did I read that correctly, that 90% of modern surfboards are still produced with these materials and chemicals that you're talking about?
Yeah, I guess it's hard to get an exact figure on these things like anything, but just from the research that I had access to get those stats all say the same, that there's an amazing amount of surfboards that are made which still rely on, I think, EPS foam and PU foam, so expanded polystyrene and polyurethane foam, which are essentially derived from oil. They are the two main types of surfboard out there. And then there's polyester resin, or the more eco-friendly version, which is epoxy resin, which emits less fumes, so it's safer to handle for the shapers. But I'm always really sensitive that I don't upset the industry, in that is how the industry has been going for a long time. It's careers, it's communities, it's part of the culture. And I liken it to the coal industry here in Australia. The coal it's made Australia very wealthy, and it's exported. And the critical thing about switching, I believe, from coal to renewables is it's got to be done in a sensible way and doesn't upset communities. And people have jobs, and there's a whole culture around everything. Just it's too. I think it's too damaging to just say we're stopping overnight. As much as that will be of massive benefit to the planet, it's the same with the surf industry. I believe that there's ways that shapers have operated for a while. There's manufacturing facilities overseas that are pumping out surfboards, and it's not going to stop overnight. But hopefully, and a lot of great shapers that I've met, who I can call friends now, are still using certain materials because essentially that's what's there in front of them. It's like when we go to the supermarket, we might buy something that has packaging, but that's what's there in front of us. And I think as soon as there's more awareness, which I hope this research and Wave Changer is helping with, awareness and also action taken from manufacturers, from shapers, to give the surfers more options. So, I'm a believer that if there's options in front of you, people will choose the right one. But if there's a lot of options in front of you, whether it's unhealthy food or, a really carbon monoxide emitting vehicle, if there's all these options in front of you and there's not very many healthy electric cars or eco surfboards, it's difficult for the consumer to make it, an informed decision. But I think we're getting there. Progress is maybe a bit slower than we'd like to see, but it's moving in the right direction, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'm super stoked on what you're doing with Wave Changer, and like you said, you're not trying to change the culture. It's a huge industry, and like I said at the top of the program, you're trying to create a carbon neutral, or you're advocating for a carbon neutral, waste-free surf industry that's respectful to nature. But as you say in your mission and vision, it wants to retain the innovation, the high performance, and excitement we all expect from surfing. So obviously your initiative and Wave Changer isn't trying to put an end to all of the things we love about surfing. And so I want to read. I want to direct the conversation towards some things that I found extremely fascinating and really cool about some of these more eco-friendly approaches to surfing and surf supplies. And I wanted to ask you a bit more about, you talk about geoprene. Can you elaborate a little bit more as to what geoprene is? Where does that come from? And how is it, how can we use it in surfing?
So geoprene is an alternative for neoprene. Neoprene being a type of synthetic rubber, kind of, well, it's not rubber, but it's a oil-derived material that almost all wetsuits are made from. And it was invented in the 1930s by DuPont, chemist, and it was used on the soles of shoes. And wetsuits now, the eco wetsuits are made with natural rubber. There's a lot of cool stuff getting done by Patagonia and Whistler, but the geoprene is essentially limestone. So it's not super eco-friendly, but I believe that the limestone reserves far outweigh the oil reserves, and there's less of a carbon footprint. So yeah, the limestone is ground down into a powder, and that powder is transformed into a material that looks and feels just like neoprene. So I see something like that, those technologies, as a positive, because it's not a sideways step, it's not a backward step, it's moving forward, and it's innovation that's inspiring others. And other wetsuit manufacturers will see that and they'll feel like they have to keep up. So it's positive. All these green initiatives, some of them are tarnished with greenwashing because they might have a small element of something that ticks a box. But I think we need to celebrate a lot of eco initiatives if they're inspiring everyone else, which I believe it is.
Absolutely. And in and around where you were talking about the geoprene, you also talk about rubber is now being extracted, or now being, at the time when you were writing this, rubber is now being extracted from Russian dandelions grown in Kazakhstan in an attempt to lighten the demand for Asian rubber trees. How, at this point now, because it's your a couple of years or a few years removed from your research, are you seeing that type of rubber from these Russian dandelions is gaining steam? Are you finding that that's being utilized more, is more prevalent?
I think that is an example that could be applied to a lot of materials, where I think the general mindset is that, materials are plentiful and we can just keep taking. And, there's a lot of materials, for example, coal, oil, anything that's been underground for a while. They've taken, tens, hundreds of thousands of years to form, and we don't know, they're very critical substructures of the earth that we don't know what the outcome of mining them, not in our lifetime. And I believe there's a lot of materials where there's a lot of stress on those rainforests of those coal mines, and it will run out eventually, and people will move somewhere else, and there's a race to the bottom to try and get the cheapest material. And unfortunately, the planet always seems to suffer when it comes to materials, because cost is the key attribute that people care about when they create an item. I think it's changing now, that culture's changing, but as a business owner, the material will be whatever maximizes your profit, I guess. And that's where I think, to kind of segue a little bit away from that, I think the regulation of materials is not far away, where it won't be a free-for-all. And I think that certain products, I think in California, actually, there's certain chemicals that have been banned. So, if you're creating a shampoo, for example, you cannot use X, Y, and Z chemicals that you would have used 10 years ago. So I think that kind of, and supporting industries with that transition so that they're not disgruntled, and, so that they're supported with education resources and perhaps offsets, financial offsets. So I think with the surfing industry, it's the same. There needs to be some support. I don't know where that comes from. Maybe government, surfing industry, governing bodies. But I think it needs to be a collaborative approach and input from the surfing industry. Not typically, policies from government don't always come from the experts, and that's when there's toes that are treaded on and people are upset. So I think that, there's plenty of experts, interesting people to lean upon with materials, and we'll get there. I think we'll get there.
Absolutely. And you raise a great point. You have places like California and other places, of course, that are taking strides towards a more environmentally friendly approach to all sorts of things. And one of the other things I found interesting in your research was the H&M garment collection initiative. And, I found that they were, you could take clothes to H&M that weren't even H&M clothes, and then they would effectively recycle it. And I think, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, because this was something you were writing about in your research, they would give you a store credit towards clothes. Can you elaborate a bit more on this initiative?
Yeah, it's actually something that my partner and I still are involved in today. We've got a bag in the cupboard which is for any garment that's ripped that can't be taken to a charity shop or a thrift shop. You take it to H&M and they give you my girlfriend will know better than me, but I think it's a 10% off voucher for each bag of clothes. And we don't actually buy anything when we go there. So now we just give the vouchers to someone else that's in the store, because really for us, it's giving something to somewhere where it just won't go on landfill, and it's just, extending its life a little bit longer. But on that subject, I think having an initiative that has an incentive, 10% discount, I feel like society needs incentives to return stuff, just positive nudge behaviors. And I think it really, really works. And I'd love to see that with the surfing industry. For example, imagine a big name surfboard manufacturer is churning out loads of boards, and at the end of life, you don't know what happens. But if that surfboard manufacturer was to say, return your board and we'll give you a discount, or we'll give you, 20% off a new board, and then that manufacturer can then deal with the surfboard. It can reuse the materials if they need to. They can take it apart. They might have a manufacturing facility. There's now robots that are doing this, that are picking out materials and doing it super fast. They can reuse the materials, or at the very least dispose of it in a sensible way. They might have a big machine where any surfboards that can't be recycled can be disposed of in a way where there's the lowest possible emissions from burning them or crushing them or whatever. So I think that incentives are the way forward. And it's happening with Patagonia as well. Patagonia allow you to return their clothing and they'll fix it. I mean, their clothing is super high quality anyway, so I think they're taking a gamble on the clothing lasting for a while. But then it puts the onus back on the manufacturer to create a quality product. They have to do something that's quality, and when they get it back, they'll have a system in place to repair it, return it, and I think more of that across the board, and it's gonna help the environment massively.
Yeah, I agree. Returning surfboards for some sort of credit for another board isn't necessarily a far-fetched idea. That seems pretty reasonable. And, as you said, you mentioned Patagonia, you've mentioned Vizsla, some of these companies that are, really putting sustainability at, building it into their business. And, I think that's a really great, it's a really great idea to, like you said, Patagonia has this guarantee, but their clothes are, quality. And so, but I want to segue away from that. And, you talk about something else in your research that, I find also quite interesting, and it fits within this idea of sustainability and eco-friendly approaches to, just surfing and just the planet more broadly. But you talk about bioplastics. Would you mind elaborating on that a little bit? And how does that relate to the surf industry?
So I'll be honest, about 3 years ago, when I was researching bioplastics, I was really excited by them. And I think just the name bioplastic sounds pretty cool and eco-friendly. But I've had my opinion not so much changed, but I've seen different sides of it now, where bioplastics, so polylactic acid, or PLA, is a type of bioplastic that's quite common. So there's a lot of like drink containers that you would get like a Slurpee in or whatever, that have a green band around it, and they're PLA. So they are a type of plant-based artificial plastic, but they have to be recycled in a separate system to traditional plastics. So those systems aren't set up yet. And I spoke with someone that worked at a recycling facility after watching a little YouTube video, and they are really annoyed with bioplastics at the moment because, they're not able to be processed. So I think the technology is there, and I applaud the fact that bioplastics or sort of traditional plastics are being put to one side and alternatives are being developed. But I think there has to be two types of plastic, and one is one that can be fully recycled, which is what we have at the moment, or something that is made in a system that it can be either recycled properly, like if PLA could be recycled properly, or if it's plant-based, which is my dream. I would love things to be made out of plants where they could have the capabilities to be recycled, but if they could be turned into compost, it's a full kind of circular economy where, just items, worst case scenario, if somebody doesn't recycle it, and let's be honest, humans are quite lazy, they don't always recycle things or dispose of them properly. If something ends up in landfill, it would break down, and hopefully there's the technology there that it doesn't emit some, toxic gases, because landfills are just pretty much a cesspit of toxic gases from different types of garbage all mingling together. So yeah, bioplastics, I think the intentions are there to do something good, but it's maybe not working out as planned, and they can be quite problematic, I think, too.
Yeah, well, thanks for filling me in on that, because it was something that I wasn't necessarily aware of. What another thing that I really found fascinating and quite intriguing about your research was, and I guess we could look at it, I'm viewing this through a gender lens, is the fact that, and according to your research, 82% of female participants that were surveyed strongly agree that the Australian government could provide financial incentives for manufacturers who engage in more greener surfing equipment, compared to 56% of all male participants who were asked the same question. You mentioned earlier, and like I said with Leon's research as well, it does seem that surfers tend to be very cognizant, and many of them are on board with more sustainable approaches. But and then you also obviously talk about that, in your view, the government should sort of have some sort of say or collaborate with surfers in that regard. People collaborate with people in the industry. But I guess my question is, did you follow up on this research, or did you have any sort of explanations as to why, roughly 30%, almost 30% more females than males were on board with this? Is there a reason why?
Yeah, no, I don't really know. I'll be honest. I think there were a lot of interesting things with the age and the gender. A lot of it wasn't groundbreaking, but some of it, perhaps, I know with the age, younger generations, I think between the age of maybe sort of 18 and 30, was super interested in sustainable products. I find it fascinating, the playing the demographics against each other and seeing how that changes things, because one of the things that that's influenced Wave Changer is tapping into people, particularly surfers, and ensuring that they enjoy our content. So we could take it from an academic perspective, which is what I did initially, and you don't get as many people interested in the content. So we made a conscious decision at the start to make things fun, quirky. We use a lot of art and music, and we get more engagement that way because surfers are generally into their art and their music. And I'm pretty sure surfers won't mind me saying that, because it's a great thing. But a lot of surfers are creative people, and you look at a lot of content online and traditional surf magazines, surf movies. It's all about music and art. So we're kind of using those levers to get people's attention, and it seems to be working, because my academic thesis was, for most surfers, perhaps quite long and dry. So we reduced it into a smaller format called Surfer versus Planet. And we got input from students. We got input from surfers, top surfers. Lane Beachley, 7 times world champion. She wrote the introduction, and she gave us feedback as well. And she gave some great feedback saying, you need to make it short, snappy, colorful, engaging. And that's what we did. And we believe it's worked. We've had a couple of thousand downloads and some great feedback. And it's just a format that is more accessible than a long document. I mean, there's a time and a place for academic research, which is critical. But I think to access most surfers and get them to read it, a reduced format seemed to work. And we enjoyed making it too.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And that's really at the heart of the podcast, right? We want it grounded in, we want to bring on people that have done academic research. But as you said, we want to make it accessible and consumable for people that aren't in that sort of academic bubble. And so, yeah, I think you nailed it. I think you did a great job. And I'm going to bring you back to what you said about the age stuff. And then, of course, we'll move on from there. But, you sort of frame the folks that are a little bit older as if it was a small percentage. But, 75% of respondents 56 years and older believe it's important to protect and replenish our natural environment during our lifetime. Now, that pales in comparison, of course, to the 94% of individuals 26 to 35. And so, obviously the 94% is, a much greater number than 75%. But that, 75% is still a good number. And so that's a real, that's pretty positive, to see that many people are aware and cognizant and interested in taking a more sustainable or eco-friendly approach to things. And so, again, like I said, you've certainly made the research you've done consumable and accessible and available to people beyond sort of the academic bubble, like I was saying earlier. And so, I'm grateful for that, and I appreciate all you're doing for Wave Changer as well. But I guess my question is what are some takeaways that, what have you learned over the years from, doing your research and being, so heavily involved in Wave Changer? What are some things you've learned?
Oh, so much. It's been really, really fun and fascinating. Some nights I'm up till like 1 a.m. reading about stuff, preparing an interview. I'm unashamedly, I'm addicted to all of this sort of content because I feel like it's an easy sell for a lot of people. Sustainability right now is a hot topic and it's getting a lot of attention, and rightly so. And I don't know, I'm learning new things every day, and I love learning stuff that you can see is getting applied in the real world, and it's getting people excited. There's a lot of bad news. If you watch, the mainstream news is full of negative stories, and it's that fear that sells news. But there's also a lot of cool stuff going on. There's a lot of great innovation. Young people are just grabbing the bull by the horns at the moment and fully embracing this shift in mentality about looking after the planet. So I believe that there's so much to learn from young people. And yeah, I love learning about materials. I feel like there's a new thing every day. I just found out a couple of days ago about an aluminium surfboard made out of recycled aluminium, but then it could be recycled again. So there's so much cool stuff going on, and I love chatting to people. Every time I chat to someone new who's doing something cool, I get super excited, and I just want to share that with everyone because I truly think it inspires others. I've seen bits of content that we've posted and other people have reposted it and shared it, and the internet is very good at, it's questionable in terms of its impact in other areas, but in terms of sharing positive stories, it's a very critical tool.
Yeah, I completely understand. And, I feel the same way about my research. I think we all, and to a certain extent, obsess over these things. But that's really what has led you down this path to be part of, to be the founder of Wave Changer. Tom, thanks so much for, just taking the time to be on the podcast. I talked about all the awesome things. I gave you, I put a plug in on episode 5 when I was talking with Leon, and so I'm super stoked that you could take the time to come on. I want to give you the last word, but I'd like for you in your last, sort of your concluding remarks, help us as listeners and as individuals, as surfers, how can we make a difference? Like, what can we do?
Yeah, big question. I think as a surfer, buy less stuff, and this could apply to anyone really. Just buy less stuff, make it last, buy things that are good quality, share positive stories of people who are doing cool stuff, rather than, there's plenty of great organizations out there that raise awareness of bad stuff going on, but I think we need to share more positive stories and We see it with the outlawing of plastic bags and single-use plastics. There's pressure. As long as there's pressure and there's voices putting pressure on the government or the manufacturers of these items, then things will change. So yeah, don't stay quiet. Demand the change that you would like to see. And I think that deep down we all know what the right thing is. It's difficult. There's hurdles in front of us, and there's mixed messages in social media and on TV. So read between the lines and do what's best for, ultimately, I think, for the planet and society, and not so much about cost and performance. Although they are critical things, let's be honest. The surfboard needs to be affordable and it needs to perform, but I think we need to kind of pump up sustainability and materials and ethical supply chains. They need to be taken way more serious, and whether that's guided by government or it's demanded by the consumers or a bit of everything, yeah, we'll get there. Oh, and I just want to say, keep up the great work with the podcast. I met you last year at the Global Wave Conference on the Gold Coast, and it's been great keeping in touch. And I think you're doing some great stuff, Jason. Keep it up.
If you enjoyed this episode with Tom Wilson, I'd like to invite you to join me for my next episode, where I'll be shifting gears a bit to talk with Dr. Case Botterblom, a history professor at the University of South Florida. I'll be chatting with Case about his book, The Dirty Secret of Early Modern Capitalism. He shows how the Dutch accumulation of great wealth was closely linked to their involvement in wars, both at home and abroad. In this book, Case ponders the issue of how capitalism has often historically thrived best when its practitioners are ruthless and ignore the human cost of their search for riches. This will certainly be an episode you won't want to miss. This has been another episode of The Surfing Historian. I'm your host, Jason Old. Be sure to share, like, and subscribe to never miss an episode. Again, thanks for listening, and until next time, stay stoked.